I can still feel my stomach sinking. This morning a woman in heels and a sharp blazer marched up my porch like she owned the place. Two so-called officers trailed behind her holding clipboards and handcuffs like props in some bad theater play. She dropped a thick folder onto my patio table, her smile tight, fake, poisonous. Notice of violations $250,000 in fines, effective immediately. I blinked. $250,000. For what? For breathing the wrong air? For daring to live on land that apparently she thought belonged to her? Excuse me, I stammered, flipping through the pages. Every line was more ridiculous than the last. Unauthorized land use, improper boundary maintenance, failure to comply with community design codes. None of it made sense. This wasn't just a fine, this was a declaration of war. The woman crossed her arms, chin raised like a queen, addressing a servant. My name is Teresa Hayes, president of Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, she announced, her voice dripping with false authority. And as long as you live on this land, you live under my rules. Her rules. My land. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. One of the officers stepped forward, jangling his cuffs. Non-payment will result in foreclosure, he said flatly. We'll seize the property if necessary. Seize my property? Over some HOA nonsense? I looked across the street. My neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, was watching from behind her curtains, the blinds twitching as if she was terrified to be seen. And then I remembered her whisper at the last HOA meeting. Be careful with Teresa. She doesn't find people, she destroys them. 3 families gone in the last year. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating. Now, standing on my own porch with $250,000 worth of bogus charges in my hand, I realized she hadn't been exaggerating at all. This can't be legal, I muttered, my hands shaking. This land is mine. You can't just— Teresa's smile widened, polished and venomous. Oh, darling, she interrupted smoothly. You'll find out soon enough what I can do. We own this neighborhood. And if you don't pay up, you'll be out before the month is over. Her words sliced deeper than the paper in my hand. The arrogance, the certainty, the way she leaned on those fake cops like she had the entire justice system in her pocket. For a moment, I almost felt powerless, like she really did own me. But then somewhere deep in my chest, anger replaced fear. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. Land doesn't lie, paperwork doesn't change the truth. Always know what's yours. I tightened my grip on the violation notice, meeting Teresa's cold eyes. She thought I was just another victim, another name on her list, another family to crush beneath her high heels. But she was wrong. This wasn't her land. This wasn't her neighborhood. And soon, everyone would know it. When the so-called officers and Teresa finally left my porch, I just stood there in silence, clutching the violation notice like it was some cursed object. The numbers blurred in front of my eyes. That wasn't just a fine, that was someone trying to take my life apart, brick by brick. I dropped into the chair on my deck, the same deck I'd built with my own 2 hands. The smell of cedar still lingered in the air. I'd spent months sanding every plank, measuring every post. It wasn't just wood nailed together, it was my pride, my sanctuary. And now, apparently it was non-compliant. The irony wasn't lost on me. See, I hadn't always lived here. This land wasn't just a plot on a map, it was family history. My grandfather had bought acres of it back in the 1960s, back when this entire area was nothing but rolling fields and thick woods. He used to tell me, son, the land remembers. It outlives us all. Respect it, and it'll protect you. When he passed, the property came to me. Most of the family wanted to sell, cash out, move on, but I couldn't. I loved this place too much. So I stayed, slowly fixing the old farmhouse, building the deck, restoring the barns. And then came the HOA. It started small. A group of neighbors who thought they could protect property values by setting rules. At first I didn't care. If people wanted to argue about mailbox colors or lawn height, let them. I stayed on my land, minded my business. But Teresa was different. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was running an empire. From the first time I met her at a community meeting, I knew she thrived on control. Perfect blonde hair, expensive suit, the way she looked down on everyone like she was royalty and we were peasants. She didn't just smile, she smirked, like she already knew your weaknesses. The neighbors feared her. I'll never forget one night at a barbecue when Mrs. Wilson from across the street leaned close and whispered, "She's run 3 families out already. Fines stacked so high they couldn't breathe. Sold their houses for pennies. Teresa bought one herself." I laughed it off at the time. I thought Mrs. Wilson was just being dramatic, the kind of neighbor who sees conspiracies everywhere. But then, last year, the Patel family disappeared almost overnight. Their fence violated height codes. Their pool wasn't up to safety standards. Within months they were gone. And who moved in? A friend of Teresa's. Still, I told myself it wouldn't happen to me. I wasn't building pools or adding garages. I was just living on my land, keeping to myself. What could they possibly come after? Turns out, everything. The first notice came 2 months ago. $500 for excess vegetation. Translation, my trees were too tall. Then another, $1,200 for non-compliant outbuilding. They meant my grandfather's barn, the one that had stood for 50 years before the HOA ever existed. I ignored them, figured they'd get bored and move on. But Teresa doesn't get bored. Last week she showed up at my door with 2 board members holding clipboards and clip-on smiles. Just routine inspection, she'd said, as if she owned the right to walk through my yard. They scribbled notes, whispered to each other, and left without another word. Now, here I was, staring at $250,000 worth of violations. Violations that seemed designed, not discovered. I looked again at the fine list. Unauthorized structure exceeding community limits. Failure to comply with boundary ordinances. Encroachment on common property. Encroachment on my own land? That one hit different, because if I knew anything, it was boundaries. My grandfather had walked me along every inch of this property line when I was a kid, teaching me where our land began and where it ended. This is ours, he'd said, tapping the earth with his cane. Never forget it. But Teresa wanted me to forget. She wanted me to doubt. And that's when the suspicion started creeping in. I remembered Michael Carter, the contractor who built the Johnsons' gazebo last year. 2 weeks after it was finished, they got hit with height violations. They fought for months, burned through savings, then sold their house under pressure. Guess who signed the deed? Teresa's cousin. I remembered Mrs. Green, who'd told me in hushed tones, don't build anything without triple-checking the codes. She'll find a way to make it illegal. I remembered every neighbor who had warned me, every uneasy glance, every empty house that once held families. And now, it was me. I folded the violation notice, my hands steady now, not shaking. Because beneath the fear, something else was stirring. Anger. If Teresa thought I was going to roll over and hand her my land, she was in for a surprise. This wasn't just a battle over fines. This was about history. This was about blood. And she had just picked a fight with the wrong family. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the violation notice spread out in front of me, the ugly red letters screaming back at me. $250,000. Every time my eyes landed on that number, a fresh wave of disbelief hit me. I'd read it so many times I almost memorized the lines, but they still didn't make sense. I dialed the number on the paperwork, the so-called HOA compliance office. Straight to voicemail. Our office hours are 9 to 5, the recording droned. I glanced at the clock. 4:37. Convenient. I hung up, frustration boiling inside me. My grandfather had taught me one thing. When something feels wrong, dig. So I started digging. First stop, my neighbors. I walked across the street to Mrs. Wilson's house. She opened the door just a crack, like she'd been expecting trouble. When she saw it was me, her shoulders softened, but only a little. They finally came for you, didn't they? She whispered. Her words made my chest tighten. What do you mean, finally? She motioned for me to step inside. Her living room smelled of lavender and old wood. Cozy, but her voice shook as she spoke. You're not the first. 3 families before you. The Patels, the Johnsons, the Kowalskis. They all got outrageous fines. Violations that made no sense. Within months, they were gone. Gone? I asked. Sold? Moved? She nodded. Forced out. Couldn't keep up with the fines. Teresa swooped in with her friends, bought their homes for half the market price, flipped them in less than 6 months. I swallowed hard. That's fraud. Mrs. Wilson's eyes darted toward the window, as if Teresa herself might be listening. Say that word too loud and you'll have more than fines to deal with. She's ruthless. I left her house with a knot in my stomach. Fraud. The word echoed in my head, like a warning bell. Could this really be bigger than a deck height or a few trees? The next day I called Michael, a local contractor who'd done odd jobs for me before. A straight-shooting guy, always busy, always booked. If anyone knew the ins and outs of Maple Ridge rules, it was him. When I explained the $250 state fine, he went silent for a long moment. I shouldn't say this, he muttered finally, but you're not the first homeowner who called me panicked. The HOA's been running people ragged with bogus code enforcement. I built a pergola for the Rodriguez family 2 years ago. Totally within limits. 3 weeks later they got slapped with $80,000 in fines. They sold their house within the year. Let me guess, I said bitterly. Teresa got it cheap. He sighed. That's how it goes. I rubbed my temples, trying to process it all. Teresa wasn't just fining people. She was running a scheme. Create a violation, pile on the pressure, force a sale, then flip the property, a cycle, repeated again and again. But why target me? I thought of my land, of the acres that stretched behind my house. Untouched, valuable. If she wanted prime property, what better way than to bury me in fines until I surrendered? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the violation notice again. For the first time, instead of fear, I felt clarity. Something was rotten here. And if I wanted to survive, I had to find proof. The next morning, I cleared the kitchen table and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. My grandfather's old records, faded folders, brittle envelopes, yellowed papers that smelled of dust and time. He'd been meticulous, the kind of man who kept receipts for nails he bought in. If Teresa thought she could bluff me with paperwork, she had no idea who she was up against. I laid out the HOA's violation notice beside his deeds and maps. The contrast was almost laughable. Her forms were crisp, computer-generated, full of legal jargon. My grandfather's were handwritten, stamped, notarized, the ink nearly faded but still there. One document caught my eye, a boundary survey from 1968, my grandfather's signature scrawled at the bottom. I traced the property lines with my finger. They weren't just covering my farmhouse. They stretched far beyond the current fences, cutting straight through what was now Maple Ridge subdivision. My heart skipped. I flipped through more papers, land deeds, tax receipts, correspondence with the county clerk. Every one of them told the same story. This land had belonged to my family long before the HOA ever existed, and more importantly, no document showed it had ever been sold. How could Teresa claim authority over me, on land my grandfather never relinquished? Still, I needed something recent. Old documents could be dismissed. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos, then headed to the county recorder's office. The clerk, a tired-looking man with glasses perched on his nose, pulled up the digital records. "Address?" he asked. I gave it. He typed, squinted at the screen, then frowned. "That's odd. The subdivision is listed under Maple Ridge HOA, but your parcel," he leaned closer, "your parcel is recorded separately. It predates the subdivision filing." "Meaning?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "Meaning the HOA doesn't technically own jurisdiction over your property, at least not on paper." He tapped the screen. "In fact, by the look of this, they may be trespassing on your family's land." I felt a rush of adrenaline. Trespassing? Not only were Teresa's fines bogus, but the entire HOA might be built on a foundation of lies. On my way out, I spotted Mrs. Green in the lobby. She was clutching a folder stuffed with papers, her face pale. When she saw me, she hesitated, then hurried over. "I heard about your fine," she said quickly. "I shouldn't get involved, but..." She thrust the folder into my hands. "You need to see this." Inside were copies of violation notices, all eerily similar. Same formatting, same inflated charges, same signatures from Teresa. Families fined into oblivion, houses sold off for a fraction of their worth. I looked up at her. "Why are you showing me this?" Her eyes darted around nervously. "Because I stayed quiet when the Patels were forced out, and the Johnsons, and every night I regret it. Don't let her do the same to you." Before I could respond, she turned and walked quickly to her car, leaving me with the weight of her folder. I drove home, my mind racing. My grandfather's deeds, the county clerk's confirmation, Mrs. Green's proof of a pattern. Piece by piece, the puzzle was forming. Teresa wasn't just running a neighborhood, she was running a racket. And if I was right, she'd just made a colossal mistake. Because the land she was trying to strip from me might actually belong to me more than it ever belonged to her precious HOA. For the next few days, I kept my head down. On the surface, I acted like just another terrified homeowner crushed under Teresa's fines. But behind closed doors, I was connecting dots. Every paper, every whisper, every suspicious detail was painting a picture. And that picture looked rotten. It started small, things I'd overlooked before. Teresa's brand new Lexus parked in her driveway, the gleaming paint so fresh it looked like it had never touched a road. Her perfectly manicured nails with tiny diamonds embedded in the polish. The designer handbags she carried to every HOA meeting. Where was all that money coming from? HOA board members didn't get rich off volunteer work. One evening, I parked my truck a block away and walked the rest of the way to Maple Ridge Community Center, where the HOA board was holding their monthly meeting. Through the tall windows, I could see Teresa at the head of the table, surrounded by her inner circle, 3 board members who looked more like her henchmen than volunteers. Their voices carried through the open side door. Next property on Elm, one of them was saying. We'll cite them for fencing and drainage issues. Should fold within 3 months? My stomach turned. They weren't protecting the community. They were strategizing like vultures, plotting their next victim. Teresa's voice cut through, calm and commanding. Good. Pressure them fast. Once they're desperate, we'll be ready with a buyer. The others nodded. It wasn't about violations at all. It was about flipping homes, milking families dry, and lining their own pockets. I pulled out my phone and recorded everything. The shaky video through the window might not be perfect, but the audio was clear enough. Every word was damning. As I turned to leave, I nearly collided with Mrs. Wilson. She'd been hiding behind the hedges, her face pale in the dim streetlight. You heard them too? I whispered. She nodded, her eyes wide. This is how they got rid of the Kowalskis. My husband tried to fight it, fought for months. We nearly lost everything. She swallowed hard. Please don't underestimate her. Teresa doesn't just want your money, she wants control. Her words sent a chill down my spine. Control. That explained everything, the arrogance in Teresa's smile, the fear in my neighbor's eyes, the sudden disappearances. That night I spread my findings across the dining table. My grandfather's deeds, the county clerk's records, Mrs. Green's folder, and now, my own recordings of the board plotting their next move. The pattern was undeniable. They thought they were untouchable, that nobody would ever push back. But they hadn't counted on me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the violation notice one last time. The red ink that had once filled me with dread now fueled something else entirely. Anger, purpose, resolve. Teresa had made one fatal mistake. She'd assumed I was just another victim. But she didn't know the truth about this land. She didn't know who she was really up against. I gathered the papers into a folder, slid my phone into my pocket, and stood up. My decision was made. I wasn't going to wait for her to bleed me dry like the others. No, I was going to confront her. And this time she wouldn't be the one holding the power. The next week felt like living in a pressure cooker. Every morning, a new envelope appeared on my doorstep. Bold red letters stamped across the top, final notice. Each one demanded more money than the last. $250,000 ballooned to $280,000, then $310,000. By Friday, the total sat at $350,000 in fines. It didn't matter that none of it made sense. Improper drainage, non-compliant paint color, unauthorized fencing. My house hadn't changed in years, but Teresa was inventing violations faster than I could open the mail. I called the HOA office again, same voicemail, no one ever picked up. By Saturday, the threats escalated. A letter taped to my front door in bold, cold type. Failure to comply will result in foreclosure proceedings. Sheriff sale scheduled pending review. Foreclosure. They were trying to take my land. I ripped the notice off the door, crumpled it in my fist, and scanned the street. Across the way, Teresa stood on her porch, phone in hand, pretending to check emails while smirking in my direction. She wanted me to see her. She wanted me to know she was watching. That night, Maple Ridge held its monthly community meeting. I almost didn't go, but something told me I needed to face her. The community center buzzed with nervous energy. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, whispering quietly, eyes darting toward the front of the room where Teresa presided like a queen on her throne. She wore a pristine white suit, gold earrings glinting under the fluorescent lights, a folder of compliance records neatly stacked in front of her. Next order of business, she announced smoothly, flipping through papers. Mr. Roberts has accrued $350,000 in outstanding violations. As per HOA bylaws, foreclosure proceedings are pending. Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, my voice steady even though my heart pounded. These fines are bogus. Every one of them. You're targeting me because you think I won't fight back. A murmur rose from the crowd. Teresa's smile didn't falter. Mr. Roberts, the board has voted unanimously. The evidence is clear. Perhaps if you spent less time arguing and more time complying. I cut her off. Complying with fraud? With lies? Her eyes flashed, just for a moment, before she smoothed her expression. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further. The room went silent. For a second, I considered backing down. But then I saw Mrs. Wilson in the back row, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her face pale. She gave the slightest nod, a reminder that I wasn't alone. I sat down, but not in defeat. My mind was already racing. Later that night, as I shuffled through the new stack of bogus fines on my kitchen table, I noticed something strange. An envelope with no return address, no HOA stamp, just my name scrawled across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no greeting, no signature, just 5 words, typed in bold. They've done this before. Look deeper. My pulse quickened. Someone out there wanted me to know the truth. And if I'd learned anything about Teresa by now, it was that the truth was the one thing she couldn't control. The anonymous note burned a hole in my pocket the entire night. Look deeper, but where? Into what? The next morning, I drove straight to the county clerk's office. Again, the clerk from before raised his eyebrows when he saw me. Back so soon? I slid the note across the counter. Somebody wants me to dig. Can you pull the HOA's financial filings? Any public records on Maple Ridge? He sighed, adjusted his glasses, and typed away. A few minutes later, he printed a stack of documents. Be careful, he warned, sliding them over. Back in my truck, I flipped through the papers. It didn't take long to spot the red flags. The HOA's operating budget was tiny, just enough to cover landscaping, trash pickup, and minor maintenance. But the board's miscellaneous expenses had skyrocketed over the past 3 years. Tens of thousands listed under vague categories: consulting fees, legal reviews, property acquisition incentives. And then there was Teresa's name, payments authorized by her signature, checks written to companies I'd never heard of, shell corporations, all linked back to the same P.O. box downtown. It was a laundering scheme, plain as day. As I pieced it together, my phone buzzed. It was Michael, the contractor. Josh, can we talk? In person. We met at the diner on Route 7. He looked terrible, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking around his coffee cup. This was a different man than the confident builder I'd known. I should have said something sooner, he muttered. But Teresa, she's not someone you cross. I leaned in. What do you mean? He rubbed his face, then finally spoke. She paid me. Bonuses. Told me to build decks, fences, sheds, all exactly to her specifications. Then weeks later she'd fine the homeowners for being out of code. Said it was quality control. Said it was legal. I believed her. My stomach nodded. You built my grandfather's deck to her specs? Michael's eyes dropped to the table. Yes, and then she filed the violation. The betrayal hit like a punch. He'd been in on it. Whether knowingly or not, he was part of her scheme. Why tell me this now? I demanded. His voice cracked. Because I can't sleep. Because I watched 3 families lose their homes. Because if she's coming for you, you need to know what you're up against. He slid a folder across the booth. Inside were copies of invoices, emails, and text messages between him and Teresa. Build to 36 inches. Bonus after violation. The words made my blood run cold. She set us both up, Michael whispered. And if you're smart, you'll leave before it's too late. I stared at him, anger and clarity colliding inside me. Leave? That's what everyone else had done. That's how Teresa had gotten away with it for so long. No, not this time. I pushed the folder back toward him. You keep these, make your own choice, but I'm not running. For the first time in weeks I saw a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. Then God help you, he muttered. As I drove home, the anonymous note echoed in my mind. They've done this before. Yes, they have. But this time, they'd picked the wrong man. The days that followed were worse than any nightmare. It started with the phone calls. No caller ID, just silence on the other end. Sometimes heavy breathing, sometimes a click, as if someone was recording. I'd hang up, but the calls always came back. Then came the cars. A black SUV, parked 2 houses down, engine idling for hours. Different drivers, same blank stares. When I stepped outside, they drove off. When I went back in, they returned. Watching, waiting. Neighbors stopped waving. Some wouldn't even look at me. Word had spread. Teresa was turning the community against me. At the grocery store, whispers followed me down the aisles. He's the troublemaker, the one fighting the HOA. Fear had done its job. No one dared stand with me. One evening, I caught 2 men lingering at the edge of my property line. They wore plain clothes but carried clipboards, pretending to inspect something. When I approached, they muttered about boundary violations and hurried off. My gut told me they weren't inspectors at all. That night I installed cameras around the house. Small ones, tucked under the eaves, hidden in the trees. If Teresa wanted to intimidate me, fine. But this time I'd have proof. The footage piled up quickly, unmarked cars circling the block, strangers stepping onto my land, snapping photos. One even tried the back gate before slipping away. When the motion light kicked on, they weren't just finding me anymore, they were trying to break me. But instead of fear, something else grew inside me. Defiance. I spent nights hunched over my dining table, organizing everything. My grandfather's deeds, the county clerk's confirmation, Mrs. Green's folder of past victims, Michael's invoices and emails. and now hours of surveillance footage showing Teresa's cronies trespassing on my land. It wasn't just a folder anymore, it was a case. Still, Teresa pushed harder. Another letter arrived, this one written in bold, threatening language. Final warning. Pay in full or eviction will proceed immediately. Law enforcement has been notified. I laughed bitterly. Law enforcement, or her fake cops again? I crumpled the paper, tossed it in the trash, and looked out the window. Teresa's house glowed across the street, her silhouette moving inside, calm, unbothered, as if she hadn't just tried to destroy me. And that's when I knew. Hiding in shadows, collecting evidence in silence, it wasn't enough. If I wanted to stop her, I couldn't keep playing defense. I had to go on the attack. The HOA's quarterly board meeting was scheduled for the following week. Everyone in the neighborhood would be there, forced to sit in those metal chairs while Teresa paraded her authority. This time, I wouldn't sit quietly. This time, I'd stand up in front of the entire community and expose her. And when I was done, Teresa Hayes wouldn't just be feared. She'd be finished. The night of the quarterly HOA meeting, the community center was packed tighter than I'd ever seen. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor, neighbors whispering nervously, their eyes flicking toward me as I walked in. I could feel the weight of every stare, some sympathetic, most fearful. At the front, Teresa sat like a queen in her throne, pristine white suit glowing under the fluorescent lights. Her lips curved into that familiar smirk as if she'd already won. "Order, please," she announced, tapping her gavel. "First on tonight's agenda, Mr. Roberts' outstanding violations." A murmur swept through the crowd. My name echoed like a curse. Teresa adjusted her papers. As of today, Mr. Roberts owes the association $380,000 in fines. Foreclosure is being considered. Sheriff's sale is pending review. The words dropped like bombs. Gasps filled the room. A few neighbors shook their heads, already convinced I was finished. I stood slowly, folder in hand. My heart hammered, but my voice was steady. "Those fines are a lie." Teresa raised an eyebrow, amused. "Excuse me?" I held up the first document, my grandfather's deed. "This land has been in my family since 1968. I have original surveys, notarized deeds, and county records proving it was never transferred to the HOA. I laid the papers on the projector table so everyone could see the enlarged images flicker across the wall. Old ink, faded stamps, my grandfather's signature. The room buzzed with whispers. Teresa leaned forward, her smile tight. "Mr. Roberts, with all due respect, old documents mean nothing if current bylaws apply. You live in Maple Ridge. You are bound by our rules." I pulled out another paper, the county clerk's confirmation. That's the thing. I checked. My parcel predates the subdivision filing. On record, the HOA has no jurisdiction over me. A gasp, louder this time. Neighbors glanced at each other, the first cracks of doubt appearing. Teresa's jaw tightened. "You misunderstand. Our authority extends." I cut her off. "I don't misunderstand anything. You've been fabricating violations, extorting families, forcing sales. And I have proof." I dropped Michael's invoices and emails on the table. "You paid contractors to build structures to your specifications, then fined homeowners for being out of compliance. Kickbacks, bonuses, all signed off by you." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Mrs. Wilson covered her mouth with her hand. A man in the back muttered, "That's exactly what happened to us." Teresa's face remained calm, but her eyes burned. "These are baseless accusations from a desperate man. Do not be fooled." "Baseless," I barked. "Then explain why multiple families lost their homes the same way. Explain the shell companies tied to your name. Explain the sudden luxury cars, the jewelry, the handbags funded by money you stole from this community." The room erupted. Neighbors shouted over each other, anger bubbling to the surface. For the first time, Teresa looked unsettled. I pulled out the last sheet, my voice cutting through the chaos. "And here's the real kicker. An original boundary survey showing the HOA's crown jewel Maple Ridge subdivision is sitting squarely on my family's land. Land that, according to every record I've found, still belongs to me." Silence fell like a stone. Every head turned toward Teresa. Her confident mask cracked just for a second. And in that silence, I felt the shift. For the first time, I wasn't the one cornered. The meeting ended in chaos. Neighbors shouting, board members scrambling, Teresa slamming her gavel until her voice went hoarse. But I barely heard any of it. My pulse was roaring in my ears. Because if what I'd just shown was real, if my grandfather's boundary survey still held weight, then the implications were bigger than even I'd imagined. The next morning I drove straight to the county archives. The building smelled of dust and old paper, the kind of place where secrets slept until someone stubborn enough came to wake them. The clerk led me down a narrow aisle, shelves stacked floor to ceiling with boxes. "Subdivision filings are in here," he said, waving vaguely before leaving me alone. I pulled out the Maple Ridge box, heart pounding. Inside were neatly organized folders, plats, permits, bylaws. I scanned page after page, searching for the one thing that mattered, a deed transferring ownership from my grandfather to the HOA. But it wasn't there. I checked again. Nothing. No sale records. No signatures. No recorded transfer. My grandfather had never sold, which meant Teresa's entire empire sat on land that still legally belonged to my family. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos of everything, and kept digging. That's when I found it, a memorandum dated 1972, stamped and notarized. It stated clearly that parcel boundaries remain under Robert's family ownership unless formally conveyed. My knees nearly buckled. He'd left us protection, he'd known the land was valuable and built a safeguard into the record. I left the archives with a box of copies under my arm, my mind spinning. On the drive home, I passed the Johnsons' old house, now remodeled. Its yard pristine, its new owners sipping wine on the porch. They looked comfortable, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath their feet didn't belong to them at all. None of it did. That night, I spread the documents across my dining table. Every sheet, every signature, every stamp pointed to the same truth. The subdivision, the houses, the entire neighborhood had been built on land that was never legally transferred. Which meant the HOA had no authority, none of their fines were valid. None of their rules applied, and if I pushed this in court, the thought made me sit back in my chair, stunned. I didn't just own my house. I owned the whole neighborhood. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. For weeks, Teresa had treated me like a criminal, a failure, a man one step from losing everything. But the truth was the opposite. She'd been trespassing on my land, extorting families on my property, building her empire on a foundation that legally belonged to me. The power shifted in that moment, I could feel it. But power's a dangerous thing. If Teresa ever learned how much I now knew, she wouldn't just find me, she'd destroy me. I gathered the papers into a single binder, slid it into a lockbox, and whispered to the empty room, "Game over, Teresa." For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The night of the showdown, the community center looked less like a meeting hall and more like a battlefield. Folding chairs were jammed wall to wall, every seat filled with nervous neighbors who whispered in low, uneasy voices. The air was thick, heavy, like a thunderstorm waiting to break. At the front of the room, Teresa presided at the long board table, her smile stretched thin and sharp. She wore a black blazer this time, not her usual white, a predator's armor. And flanking her were two men in dark suits and polished shoes. One carried a briefcase, the other stood stiff as if rehearsed to look intimidating. Behind them, two uniformed officers lingered by the exit. Their badges gleamed a little too bright, their belts a little too new. It didn't take a genius to see what she was doing. Teresa hadn't just come prepared, she'd come armed. The murmurs died as she tapped her gavel. Clack, clack.
"Order!"
"Tonight's agenda is clear," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "The matter of Mr. Roberts' ongoing violations and his refusal to comply with Maple Ridge regulations." Her words were met with a ripple of gasps. Heads turned toward me. I stood, folder clutched in my hand, every eye in the room digging into me. My pulse thundered, but I forced my voice steady. "These so-called violations are fabricated. Teresa Hayes has been running a scam." "Enough," she snapped, her gavel slamming against wood. "Sit down or you will be removed." The two suited men leaned forward. The one with the briefcase opened it, pulling out papers stamped with official-looking seals. "This is a notice of foreclosure," he declared. "Failure to pay will result in immediate seizure of property." The crowd murmured. Some neighbors looked horrified, others terrified. The taller of the two fake officers stepped forward, hand brushing against the cuffs at his belt. "If you refuse, sir, we'll have no choice but to escort you out." I glanced around the room. Fear hung thick in the air, but under it, something else was brewing. Doubt. People shifted in their seats, whispering, glancing from Teresa to me and back again. I raised my voice. "You all see what's happening, don't you? This isn't enforcement, this is intimidation. These men aren't here to protect you, they're here to silence me." Teresa's lips curled. "You're delusional. You've poisoned this community long enough. Officers, remove him." The shorter one moved first, stepping toward me, posture stiff, rehearsed, but I didn't flinch. Because in my jacket pocket, my phone's recorder was already running. Every word, every threat, Every order was being captured. I looked Teresa dead in the eye. You want me gone because you know I've uncovered the truth. You can threaten, you can fine, you can even drag me out of here, but you can't bury what's already on record. The crowd buzzed louder now. Some pulled out their own phones, recording. The tide was shifting. Teresa slammed her gavel again. Enough! Officers, do it now. The taller one reached for me, his hand hovering inches from my arm. And that's when I knew. The real battle had just begun. The taller officer's hand hovered over my arm, but I didn't move. Instead, I turned so the whole room could hear me. Before you lay a finger on me, I said, maybe you should tell this community your names. Your real names. The officer froze, his partner stiffened, the room went silent. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes narrowing, phones lifted higher. Teresa slammed her gavel. Do not engage him, remove him at once. I raised my voice. Louder, stronger. Go on, officer. Badge number? Precinct? Who's your commanding officer? The tall one swallowed, his lips parting, but no words came. His badge gleamed under the lights, too shiny, too new. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That doesn't look real. Where are they from? I pressed harder. What jurisdiction do you serve? County? City? State? Tell us. The shorter one's face reddened. We don't have to answer. Wrong, I cut in, my voice like a blade. Every real cop knows their badge number, their station, their oath. You don't, because you're not real cops. Gasps filled the room. Someone in the back shouted, "He's right." Teresa rose from her chair, her composure cracking. Enough of this circus. These men are authorized by the board to enforce compliance. Authorized? I barked, turning toward her. Or hired? Which shell company signed their paychecks this time, Teresa? The same ones funding your luxury cars and jewelry? Her face flushed red. She slammed the gavel so hard the wood cracked. Shut him down, she screamed. But the room was no longer hers. Neighbors were on their feet now, phones raised, voices rising. Answer him, Teresa. Who are these people? What gives you the right? The suited man with the briefcase stepped forward, waving his stack of foreclosure papers. This is legal authority. I snatched one page from his hand and held it to the projector light. The seal flickered, pixelated, a cheap printout. My laugh cut through the chaos. Legal authority? This isn't worth the paper it's printed on. You forge documents, you hire actors, and you call it law? The crowd erupted again. Neighbors surged closer, demanding answers. Teresa pounded the gavel, shouting over the noise. Quiet, all of you. This man is trespassing on HOA property, and as president, I demand his removal. I raised my folder high, my voice booming over hers. HOA property? I roared. There is no HOA property. Not here, not ever. Because every inch of this neighborhood, every street, every house, every blade of grass was built on land that legally belongs to me. The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. People surged forward, some cheering, others demanding proof. The fake officers froze, caught in the spotlight of suspicion. The lawyers shrank back, their authority crumbling. I stepped closer to the table, slamming down the old boundary survey, the clerk's memo, the deeds. Pages fluttered like cards on a dealer's table, undeniable, unshakable. You've been trespassing, extorting, lying, for years. And it ends tonight. Neighbors surged to their feet, some chanting, others shouting Teresa's name in anger. The entire hall shook with the force of voices finally freed. Teresa's eyes blazed as she pointed at me, shrieking, "He's a liar! He forged this! He's manipulating all of you!" But her voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. And for the first time, Teresa looked small. The room had erupted into chaos. Neighbors pressed forward, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. Phones were out everywhere, screens glowing as they recorded every second. I stood my ground at the front, my folder open like a weapon. Page after page of deeds, memos and records lay scattered across the table. "Here," I shouted, jabbing a finger at one document. Original survey from 1968, signed, stamped, notarized. My grandfather never sold this land. I slapped another page down. County clerk's memo, confirming my parcel predates Maple Ridge. The HOA has no jurisdiction. I held up Michael's printed emails. Proof that Teresa ordered contractors to build violations on purpose, then fined families into foreclosure. Extortion, plain and simple. Gasps rolled through the crowd. A woman near the front covered her mouth, whispering, "That's exactly what happened to us." One of the fake officers shifted uncomfortably. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the bright lights. The shorter one finally cracked, blurting out, "We were just hired." She said it was community security. The room exploded again. Dozens of voices shouting, "Fraud, liar, resign." The taller officer panicked, backing toward the exit. "I'm not getting arrested for this," he muttered before shoving the door open and bolting into the night. Phone swung to follow him, capturing every step. The suited lawyer with the briefcase stammered, shuffling his forged documents back together. His partner tugged at his sleeve. "We need to leave," he hissed, eyes darting toward the furious crowd. They retreated quickly, shoulders hunched, their authority shattered. Now all eyes were on Teresa. She stood rigid at the board table, face flushed, hair trembling from the force of her rage. "You fools," she screamed, her voice cracking. "He's manipulating you. He forged it all." I raised my phone high, its screen glowing. The red dot blinked steadily. "Every word, every threat, every order you gave tonight, it's all been recorded. Backed up to the cloud. You can't delete it. You can't bury it. The truth is out." The crowd surged, voices roaring over hers. Some chanted my name. Others shouted for her resignation. A few just stood frozen, shock carved across their faces as the foundation of their community crumbled in real time. Teresa slammed the gavel one last time, the sound sharp and desperate. "Sit down," she shrieked. "All of you sit down. I am the president of this HOA and But her voice was drowned out by the neighbors' fury. For the first time, the woman who had ruled Maple Ridge with an iron fist wasn't feared. She was cornered, exposed, small. Then, cutting through the chaos, came a sound that froze everyone in place. "Wee-oh! Wee-oh!" Police sirens wailed outside the community center, flashing red and blue lights painting the windows. The crowd fell silent, every head turned toward the doors. Were the real authorities finally here to end Teresa's reign? Or had she managed one last trick, bringing in reinforcements to crush me for good? The sirens grew louder, closer, until they drowned every other sound. And in that deafening moment, the fate of Maple Ridge hung in the balance. The courthouse buzzed like a hive, reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward as neighbors filed past. Some had tears in their eyes, others carried boxes of old violation letters, eviction notices, foreclosure papers, scars of years under Teresa's reign. Inside, the gallery was packed, every row filled with families who had lost their homes, families still fighting, and families who were terrified they would be next. The weight of their stories pressed down on me as I took my seat beside my attorney. Across the aisle, Teresa sat at the defense table, lips pursed, eyes cold. She wore a tailored navy suit, her hair perfectly styled. Beside her, an expensive lawyer adjusted his cufflinks, the picture of smug confidence. To them, this was just another performance. "All rise," the bailiff called as the judge entered. Judge Morrison, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority, settled into her seat. "Case 24-5-17, Roberts v. Maple Ridge Homeowners Association," the clerk read aloud. The words echoed in the chamber, my name finally standing against hers. My attorney, David Walker, rose for opening remarks. "Your Honor, this case is about abuse of power. It's about a homeowners association that fabricated violations, extorted families, and destroyed lives, all without legal authority. And it's about one man, Joshua Roberts, who discovered that Maple Ridge was built on land that never belonged to the HOA in the first place." A ripple of shock moved through the gallery. Teresa's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. Baseless claims meant to sway public opinion." Judge Morrison lifted a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Clark. Let him finish." David nodded, steady. "Over the coming days, we will present original deeds, notarized surveys, and county records proving ownership. We will hear testimony from victims who lost homes, from contractors who were manipulated, and from officials who confirmed the fraud. The evidence will show not only that the HOA acted outside its jurisdiction, but that it did so deliberately, for profit." The judge's gaze flicked to Teresa, who sat rigid, jaw clenched. Then it was our turn. David called me to the stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat, my palms damp against the wood railing. My voice cracked at first but steadied as I spoke. "My grandfather bought the land in 1968. He never sold. These documents," I held up a yellow deed, "show our family's ownership of every acre beneath Maple Ridge. This boundary survey, stamped in 1972, proves the subdivision was built without proper transfer." David placed the papers on the projector, enlarging them on the screen for all to see. Signatures, seals, notarized stamps. Irrefutable. Gasps filled the room. One woman clutched her husband's arm, whispering, "That's why they could never beat her. She never had the right." The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. She tapped the papers with her gavel. "These are official records?" "Yes, Your Honor," David said. "Certified by the county clerk just last month." Judge Morrison's brows furrowed. She sat back in her chair, voice firm. "This changes jurisdiction entirely." The gallery erupted in whispers. Teresa's face drained of color for the first time. And in that moment, I felt it, the ground beneath her empire shifting, crumbling, collapsing under the weight of the truth. The next morning, the gallery was even fuller. Word had spread. Families who'd once lived in Maple Ridge, now scattered across town, filled the benches. Some carried photos of the houses they'd lost. Others clutched each other's hands, bracing for memories too painful to relive. David stood tall. "Your Honor, we will now present testimony from the victims of Maple Ridge, HOA. The first witness, Mrs. Rodriguez, took the stand. She was small, silver-haired, her hands trembling as she raised them to swear the oath. Her voice shook, but it carried. "We saved for 15 years. It was our dream home." Then came the notices. First for our fence, then our deck, then our garage. Every month, something new. We paid until we couldn't anymore. Then they told us foreclosure was the only option. Her husband, seated in the gallery, wiped his eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez clutched a photo, her family smiling on the porch of a house they no longer owned. "We sold for 100,000 less than it was worth. Teresa bought it through a company with another name. She flipped it for profit. And we lost everything." The gallery was silent, save for quiet sobs. The Johnsons followed. Mr. Johnson's voice was firm but hollow. "We fought for months. Court fees drained us. My wife and I separated under the stress. Teresa destroyed not just our finances, she destroyed our family." Then came the Patels. Their teenage son testified, his eyes blazing. "My parents skipped medical treatments for me so they could pay the fines. We still lost our home." His words cracked, the weight of it too much for someone his age. Each testimony hit like a hammer. Families broken, savings wiped out, lives dismantled piece by piece, all orchestrated by the HOA under Teresa's hand. Finally, David called Michael Carter. The contractor shuffled to the stand, looking 10 years older than when I'd last seen him. His hands trembled as he swore the oath. David's voice was steady. "Mr. Carter, can you explain your role in Maple Ridge construction projects?" Michael's eyes darted around the room before fixing on the judge. "I was hired to build decks, fences, patios, always to Teresa's exact specifications." "Did she ever instruct you to build them incorrectly?" Michael swallowed hard. "Yes, she told me to add inches, change angles, anything that would trigger a violation later. Then she promised me bonuses when fines were issued." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Teresa shifted in her seat, jaw tight. Michael's voice broke. "I told myself it was legal. Quality control, she called it. But I knew families lost their homes because of what I built. Because I believed her." David slid an email into evidence. Teresa's name glared from the page. "Build to 36 inches. Bonus after violation." The gallery erupted. Shouts, tears, outrage. The bailiff called for order, pounding his staff. Judge Morrison's eyes cut to Teresa, sharp as knives. Teresa's lawyer shot up, voice desperate. "Objection? This is one man's word." The judge's gavel cracked. "Sit down, Mr. Clark. The evidence speaks louder than excuses." All eyes turned to Teresa, and for the first time she would have to speak for herself. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. The gallery leaned forward as Teresa Hayes finally rose from the defense table. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked to the stand, shoulders squared, chin high. She swore the oath with a steady voice, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Her lawyer was quick to begin. "Miss Hayes, you've served as president of the Maple Ridge HOA for over a decade, correct?" "Yes," she replied smoothly. "I've dedicated my life to keeping our community safe, beautiful, and compliant with standards that protect property values." He smiled, playing to the gallery. "And these accusations? That you fabricated violations, extorted families, what do you say to that?" Her lips curved into a practiced smile. "Baseless. A smear campaign by Mr. Roberts to escape his own penalties. Every notice issued was lawful, every decision made by the board was fair." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Disbelief, anger, scoffs. David Walker rose for cross-examination. His voice was cold steel. "Miss Hayes, can you confirm this email is yours?" He held up the printout, "Build to 36 inches. Bonus after violation." Her smile faltered. I don't recall sending that. Yet it was recovered from your HOA account. Are you saying someone else used your email?" She hesitated. "It must have been a misunderstanding. Quality checks are standard practice. Quality checks? David cut in sharply. Is that what you call hiring fake officers to intimidate homeowners? Because we have sworn testimony and video recordings showing exactly that. Gasps surged through the courtroom. Teresa's composure cracked. Her face flushed. Her hands gripped the railing. That was community security, she shouted, her voice rising. We did what we had to do to maintain order. The judge's gavel slammed. Miss Hayes, control yourself. David leaned in, voice deadly calm. Order? Or profit? Because these bank records show deposits into accounts linked to you, $350,000 in 6 months. Payments routed through shell companies tied to Maple Ridge LLC. How do you explain that? The gallery erupted in shouts. Thief? Fraud? Teresa's mask shattered. You don't understand, she snapped, eyes wild. These people didn't deserve those houses. They were careless, weak. I gave this neighborhood structure, power. Without me, Maple Ridge is nothing. Her words hung in the air, poisonous, damning. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. She looked out over the courtroom, then back to Teresa. I've heard enough. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. This court finds that the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association acted without legal jurisdiction. All fines, foreclosures, and evictions are null and void. Restitution will be ordered to the victims, funded by liquidation of HOA accounts and assets. Furthermore, she fixed Teresa with a glare. This court finds Teresa Hayes guilty of fraud, extortion, and abuse of authority. Sentencing, 5 years in county prison, full restitution, and a permanent ban from leadership of any association. The gallery erupted. Cheers, sobs, applause thundered through the chamber. Families clung to each other, some crying openly, others whispering prayers of thanks. I sat frozen, the weight of it all crashing down. It was over, the nightmare, the intimidation, the threats. Finished. Mrs. Rodriguez reached for my hand from the front row, her eyes wet with gratitude. You saved us, she whispered. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. The days after the verdict felt unreal. For months, Maple Ridge had lived under a shadow of fear. Now the sunlight poured freely. News vans crowded the street corners, cameras catching neighbors hugging, laughing, crying tears that had been buried too long. Headlines scrolled across the evening broadcasts. HOA fraud exposed, neighborhood freed. Families reclaim homes after historic ruling. The Rodriguez family stood in their driveway again, their daughter clutching a set of keys they thought they'd never hold again. The Johnsons walked hand in hand, their faces softer, their voices lighter. The Patel boy kicked a soccer ball across his yard, the sound of his laughter carrying into the street. For the first time in years, Maple Ridge wasn't afraid. It was alive. That evening, the community gathered on the very deck that had started everything. Long tables lined with food stretched across my yard. Smoke from barbecue grills curled into the twilight. Music played softly from someone's speaker, and for once the HOA wasn't there to measure the angle of the chairs or fine anyone for parking too close. Mrs. Wilson raised a glass, her voice trembling with joy. To Joshua Roberts, she declared, the man who stood when the rest of us were too scared to. Our neighborhood owes him everything. Cheers erupted, glasses clinked, dozens of hands clapped my back as voices chanted my name. Then, from the crowd, someone shouted what others had been whispering. You should take over the HOA, lead us the right way. The chant spread quickly. President Roberts, President Roberts. I stood there stunned. Dozens of eyes gleamed with hope, waiting for me to claim the seat Teresa had abused for years. But I shook my head slowly, lifting a hand for quiet. The noise faded, curiosity settling in its place. I didn't fight for power, I said, my voice carrying over the crowd. I fought for freedom. Community isn't about rulers or fines or fear. It belongs to the people. To all of you, not to me, not to anyone. Silence hung for a heartbeat, then applause broke like a wave, louder and more genuine than before. This time it wasn't a cheer for me. It was a cheer for themselves, for their freedom, their neighborhood, their future. And in that moment I knew the real victory wasn't mine, it was theirs. The days stretched into weeks and Maple Ridge transformed before my eyes. Where there had once been boarded-up windows, families now painted shutters, bright colors. Lawns once left to rot under fines bloomed with flowers again. Children raced bicycles down the street, without their parents shouting warnings about HOA patrols. I walked the neighborhood often, binder of old deeds finally tucked away, replaced by the sound of hammers and laughter. The Rodriguez family waved me over one afternoon. Their daughter pressed a plate of cookies into my hands, her smile shy but grateful. We're home, she said simply, and her mother's eyes filled with tears. The Patels stopped me by their driveway. Their son, the same boy who once testified with anger in his voice, hugged me suddenly. "You saved my parents," he whispered. His father placed a hand on my shoulder, voice thick. "No, you saved all of us." Even the Johnsons, once broken by stress, invited me to their backyard. They'd rebuilt their marriage along with their home. Mr. Johnson raised a beer in my direction. "To second chances," he said, clinking bottles with me. Every corner of the neighborhood carried echoes of healing. But it also carried ghosts. Sometimes, when I walked past Teresa's old house, I remembered her words. The venom, the arrogance, the belief she was untouchable. Her greed had hollowed out an entire community. Michael's confession still replayed in my head, the guilt in his eyes a scar he would carry for life. And I thought about betrayal, how easy it is for power to twist loyalty, how fast trust can fracture when money enters the picture. But then I saw justice in motion, families reclaiming what was stolen, children laughing where silence once reigned, couples holding hands again, instead of clutching foreclosure letters. It struck me that victory doesn't always come in the gavel strike or the judge's ruling. Sometimes it comes in the ordinary moments, a child's laughter, a neighbor's smile, the quiet peace of knowing fear has finally lost its grip. One evening I stood on the edge of my land, as the sun dipped low. In my hands were the old violation letters, the fines stacked high like bricks of shame. I flipped through them, $200 here, $500 there, the infamous $250,000 balance, stamped in red at the top. They had once felt like chains, now they felt like paper. And soon, they would be ash. The night was still when I lit the fire pit in my backyard. Flames licked upward, glowing orange against the dark. The air carried that sharp, smoky bite that always reminded me of autumn, except this fire wasn't for warmth. It was for closure. In my hand I held the stack of letters that had once defined my life. The first notices were small, neat slips of paper, fines for mailbox color, for grass height, for fence paint. I thumbed through them like chapters of a book I never wanted to read again. And at the bottom sat the monster, the one that had nearly broken me. $150,000 due immediately. I stared at the red ink, bold and merciless. That number had kept me awake countless nights. It had threatened to take my home, my legacy, my sanity. Teresa had wielded it like a weapon, believing it would crush me into surrender. But now it was just paper. I knelt and fed the first letter to the flames. The edges curled, blackened, disappeared. One by one I dropped them in, every false violation, every forged demand, every hollow threat. When I reached the $250, my hand trembled. For a moment I heard Teresa's voice echoing in my head. "You'll never win. You'll lose everything." I almost believed it again. Almost. Then I remembered the Rodriguez family's tears as they turned their key in the lock of their reclaimed home. The Patel boys' laughter echoing down the street. The Johnsons raising a toast in their backyard. I remembered the judge's gavel, the cheers in the courtroom, the moment the neighborhood finally believed we were free. I pressed the letter into the flames. It curled violently, edges glowing, the bold red number consumed in seconds. Ash drifted upward, carried away by the wind, gone forever. A weight lifted from my chest I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Behind me, voices rose. Neighbors gathered, some with drinks in hand, others simply curious. Children ran through the yard, laughter spilling into the night, the fire reflected in their eyes, warm, safe. I turned to them, the flames crackling at my back. "This land isn't just mine," I said quietly, but the words carried. "It's ours. It always was. And no fine, no fraud, no tyrant can take that from us again." Applause rose, soft at first, then swelling like the fire. I looked at the last of the ash drifting skyward and smiled. The battle was over. The fear was gone. And Maple Ridge, my land, our home, was alive again. They fined me $250,000. They tried to strip away my home, my land, my legacy, but in the end, it turned out they never had power over me at all. This story wasn't just about one man fighting back. It was about a community reclaiming what was stolen, about families who refused to stay silent, and about justice finally landing where it belonged. Maple Ridge is alive again, not because of one victory, but because people chose to stand together against greed and fear. And that's the lesson I want you to take with you tonight. No fine, no fraud, no corrupt authority can ever bury the truth forever. If you loved this story of justice and revenge, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment about what part shocked you the most, and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Until next time, remember, sometimes the fight you don't want is the fight that sets you free.